Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe it was the uniform, or the fact that her patch didn't carry a combat unit insignia, just a red cross and faded Velcro where a name tag used to be. To most of them, she was just the driver, the woman who moved supplies and casualties, the one who didn't belong in the circle where the real soldiers talked. Staff Sergeant Riley Shaw didn't take offense. She didn't take much of anything anymore. Years of keeping her head down had trained her to listen, not speak, to blend in. The morning sun had barely climbed over the Afghan desert when her ambulance rolled out with the convoy. 3 Humvees, 1 armored truck, and her tucked between them like an afterthought. The red cross painted on her doors still meant something to her. But out here, those symbols didn't stop bullets. The engine's vibration was steady beneath her hands. She drove with the precision of someone who needed order, who found calm in repetition. Through the windshield, a curtain of dust drifted from the lead vehicle, softening the horizon into a blur of sand and light. She didn't say a word the whole ride. Didn't have to. At Forward Operating Base Liberty, soldiers moved like clockwork, unloading crates, checking weapons, laughing too loud about nothing. A base that felt safe, too safe. Riley parked the ambulance, set the brake, and began her ritual, inspecting, logging, cleaning, repeating. The kind of details no one else noticed. Because when things go wrong, really wrong, it's the small details that save lives. She crouched beside a tire gauge when she heard them. Evan Cross and his fire team. The Golden Boys of Liberty. Loud, confident. The kind of men who believed the universe owed them safety because they'd survived long enough to think it did. "Please tell me it's not the ambulance chick again," one of them laughed. Cross chuckled, his voice carrying over the desert air. "Shaw's fine for supply runs, point A to point B, but a combat op. She'd freeze before the first shot." Another voice joined in. "Why is she even here? We've got plenty who can drive and shoot." "Exactly," said another. "What's the point of one who can't?" Their words floated over like dust, soft, irritating, and meaningless. Riley didn't look up, didn't need to. She'd heard worse before. Words like that didn't cut anymore. They just confirmed what she already knew. People only saw what they expected to see. Chief Logan Ward, standing at the edge of the maintenance bay, saw something different. He'd been around long enough to know what quiet competence looked like, and what it hid. She moved differently. Never turned her back to open spaces. Eyes tracked corners, exits, and patterns without thought. Even her M4 standard issue looked like it belonged to someone who tuned it by instinct. The sights were customized, the sling adjusted perfectly for quick transitions. He'd seen a setup like that once before, in a photo from a classified briefing on special operations. Ward didn't say a word, but he started watching her closer. That night, when most of the base was asleep, the motor pool lights hummed softly over concrete and oil stains. Riley was still there, reorganizing the inside of her ambulance. Every inch of space optimized. Tourniquets placed by muscle memory. IV lines coiled for one-handed reach. Trauma packs layered like puzzle pieces, accessible blindfolded. Ward approached quietly. "That's a pretty, unique configuration you've got there, Shaw." Her hands stilled for just a heartbeat, then kept moving. "Just making things more efficient, Chief. Everything needs to be within reach if we start taking casualties." He leaned against the doorframe, studying her calm precision. "That's not a regulation setup. That's a combat medic layout built for high-threat environments." She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Old habits," she said simply. "My last assignment had different standards." Ward didn't press, but his instincts whispered the truth. She wasn't who her file said she was. Days passed, the routine continued. Convoys, supply runs, refuels. the quiet rhythm of a base that believed war happened somewhere else. Then came the intel report, just like all the others. A stack of vague warnings, increased movement in the sector, possible coordination among insurgent groups. Words printed on crisp paper that no one took seriously anymore. Colonel Marion Holt skimmed it during the weekly meeting, her tone half distracted. "Same as usual," she said. "Stay sharp. Don't assume we're safe just because we've been lucky." Her officers nodded, more out of habit than belief. No one expected what was coming. Riley saw the report tacked on the motor pool bulletin board, brief, sanitized, and easy to ignore. But she didn't. That night, she checked every inch of her ambulance. Fuel lines, seals, spare tires, comms gear. Every magazine loaded. Every route mentally mapped. Not paranoia. Preparation. She told herself it was just muscle memory, old instincts refusing to fade. But deep down, she knew better. Calm never lasts long in places built on sand and silence. At 02:37 hours under a moonless sky, the desert cracked open. The first rocket hit the fuel depot, turning night into a sheet of orange fire. The explosion shook the ground so hard it felt like the earth itself screamed. Riley was on her feet before the sirens even started. No hesitation. No confusion. Her body moved faster than thought, because she'd heard that sound before. Incoming fire. Major assault. Within seconds, 6 more RPGs rained down in coordinated succession. The command center vanished in flame. The comms hub disintegrated. Then the generators, plunging half the base into darkness. Chaos screams, static-filled radios. But through the chaos, one voice stayed steady in her mind, her own. "Move, get to your vehicle." She ran low across open ground, the sand biting her face, the air thick with smoke. Her ambulance was still there, scarred by debris, but intact. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The radio came alive with broken transmissions. All units, multiple breaches on the north and east perimeters. QRF deploying to Sector 3. Medical, prepare for mass casualties. Riley grabbed the handset. "Liberty Medical 1, ambulance ready for evac. Where do you need me?" Static, then a strained voice. "Medical 1, hold at the aid station. Wounded inbound from several sectors. Prepare for transport." "Copy," she said, flooring the accelerator. The headlights cut through the smoke, catching fragments of men running, shouting, bleeding. Tracer rounds sliced the night like red comets. Another explosion, the ammo dump shaking the ground again. She swung wide around debris, her heartbeat syncing with the chaos, fast, controlled, precise. When she reached the aid station, it was already under fire. Concrete walls pocked with bullet scars, medics shouting over each other. Wounded soldiers laid out in the dirt, pale faces, trembling hands, blood everywhere. Sergeant Noah Price, the lead medic, caught sight of her. "Shaw, 3 urgent for surgery. Now can you get them there?" She scanned the route. 300 meters of open ground. Crossfire cutting through it like a meat grinder. She calculated the angles, the timing. 90 seconds of exposure. Possible barely. "I can get them there," she said, steady. They loaded the stretchers. She strapped the wounded in, secured IVs, slammed the doors shut, and took the wheel. Then one deep breath. "Hang on," she whispered. She drove like a ghost through fire. Not a straight line, never a straight line. Weaving between burning trucks, using wrecks as cover. Bullets ricocheted off armor. One cracked the windshield, spraying glass across her arms. She didn't flinch. When she reached the surgical bunker, she reversed hard, putting the ambulance between the wounded and the gunfire. The surgical team rushed out, pulling the casualties inside. Price's voice came through the radio again, urgent. 3 more incoming. Can you make another run? Riley was already turning the wheel. On my way. For the next half hour, she did what no one expected her to do. Run after run, through fire and debris. Each trip faster, each one riskier. By the 5th run, an RPG landed close enough to lift the ambulance off its wheels. The world went white, then black, then silent. She tasted dust and metal. But when the ringing in her ears cleared, she started the engine again. Because stopping wasn't an option. She made her 6th run, just as the aid post came under direct fire. A machine gun on the eastern ridge had locked in on them. Its bursts ripped through sandbags and walls, pinning everyone flat. Riley crawled to the corner of a shattered barrier, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. She saw it, the heavy gun position with clear visibility on both the aid post and the surgical route. They were trapped. No one could move without being shredded. Price shouted over the din. We can't move. That gun has to go down or everyone dies. But support fire was already stretched thin. No drones, no artillery. Riley glanced at the ambulance, then at her rifle. That old instinct flared again, the one she'd buried deep under the title of driver. Price saw the look in her eyes and tried to stop her. Shaw, don't even think about it. You're not infantry. Those men won't last 10 minutes, she said softly. And without waiting for permission, she grabbed her M4. The weapon felt familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. She checked the chamber, tightened her sling. Each movement efficient, precise, not like someone who'd read a manual, but someone who'd lived it. Shaw, what the hell are you doing? Price shouted. She looked at him, calm, resolved. Buying you 8 minutes. And then she vanished into the darkness. The culvert ran along the east wall, a narrow flood channel that cut toward the ridge. Barely wide enough to crawl through. Concrete scraping her elbows. Every breath echoing. The machine gun above thundered, shaking the air. She moved anyway, slow, silent, focused. When she emerged on the far end, the gun was less than 50 meters away. 3 fighters, 1 firing, 2 reloading. She read the angles in a glance sequence, timing movement. 3 shots controlled, silent. 8 seconds from first trigger pulled to final silence. The machine gun stopped. She exhaled once, slow. Then keyed her radio. Machine gun position neutralized. Aid station is clear to evacuate. For a heartbeat, no one replied. Then Price's voice came back, ragged. Shaw, what the hell? But she cut him off. Talk later, get your wounded out. She turned the captured weapon toward the valley below, ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in years, Riley Shaw wasn't hiding anymore. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the only one who's been to war twice, once on the battlefield and once inside herself. They said the battle was over, but no one on base could sleep that night. Smoke still rose from the far perimeter, twisting like ghosts above the shattered walls. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors chopping through silence that wasn't silence at all. It was the sound of survival. Riley sat on the ground near the aid station, back against her ambulance, helmet off, hands trembling in the dim red glow of emergency lights. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving only exhaustion, and that hollow space soldiers never talk about. The one where you realize you're alive, and others aren't. She looked at her palms, small cuts from broken glass, caked in dust and blood. Not her blood, she hoped. Didn't matter. All around her, medics moved like ghosts. Stretcher teams carried the wounded into what was left of the surgical bunker. Someone sobbed quietly behind her, another screamed for morphine. And through it all, the sound of boots, steady, deliberate. Evan Cross stopped a few feet away, rifle slung, face still streaked with ash. He didn't speak for a long time. Maybe he couldn't find the words. He'd seen her. All of them had. The quiet ambulance driver who'd crawled through a drainage tunnel and taken out a fortified machine gun nest alone. Now, in the flicker of burning debris, she looked less like a medic and more like a ghost from a kind of war most of them had never fought. "Those men you saved," Cross said finally. His voice cracked low, tired. "They're alive, all of them." Riley didn't look up, just nodded once. "Good," she said softly. "That's what mattered." Cross hesitated. That was one hell of a thing, Shaw, I mean." But she stopped him with a glance. "Save it, people are still dying inside. Go help your team." He opened his mouth, closed it again, and walked away. For the first time in his life, Sergeant Evan Cross didn't know how to measure another soldier. At 400 hours, the last of the fires were under control. Command had reestablished partial comms. The perimeter was secure. On paper, the crisis was over. But inside the operations tent, the real storm was just beginning. Colonel Marion Holt stood behind a table cluttered with maps and half-burned reports. Her eyes were hard, not angry yet, but close. Across from her sat Riley Shaw, helmet on the floor, hands resting on her knees. Chief Logan Ward stood nearby, silent but watchful. And next to Holt, a man in plain clothes. Lean, older, eyes that had seen too much. Caleb Stone, Defense Intelligence. The kind of man who didn't need introduction. Holt began with the obvious. "Staff Sergeant Shaw, your actions tonight were exceptional." Her tone was precise, cold. "You saved dozens of lives. You also disobeyed several standing orders and left your assigned post." Riley didn't flinch. "Yes, ma'am." "Explain yourself." She took a breath, the same way she'd done before breaking a door or stepping off a bird into darkness. "Because there was no one else in position to take that gun, ma'am, and because I knew I could." Simple words, but they carried weight. Holt stared at her, searching her face for arrogance or defiance. She found neither, only certainty. Chief Ward shifted slightly. "Colonel, with respect, she's right. Without her, half this base would be body bags by sunrise." Holt didn't argue. She knew it was true. But she wanted to understand how. "How did you do it?" she asked finally. "You moved through a combat zone under sustained fire, flanked a fortified position, eliminated 3 entrenched hostiles, and operated a captured PKM with precision accuracy." Riley looked down at her gloves, voice quiet. "Training, ma'am." "What kind of training?" Before she could answer, the man in plain clothes, Caleb Stone, spoke for the first time. "The kind she's not supposed to talk about." Holt turned sharply. "And who exactly are you, Mr. Stone?" He opened a worn leather folder, sliding a document across the table. "Defense Intelligence Agency, Special Activities Division. I'm here to clarify what your personnel records don't show." Holt's eyes flicked to Riley. "You want to tell me what this is?" Riley said nothing. Stone continued. "Staff Sergeant Shaw's record is accurate as far as it goes. Transport operator, 4 years logistics, Afghanistan rotation. But that's her cover file. The real one's classified, limited access only, until tonight." He paused, studying Holt's face. "She spent 7 years attached to Naval Special Warfare as a combat support specialist, embedded with SEAL teams across multiple theaters: Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Horn of Africa, and several locations I can't disclose." Holt's lips parted, disbelief flickering. "You're telling me she's—" Stone nodded. "One of 20 cross-trained operatives in a hybrid logistics direct action program, specialized in covert sustainment, medical rescue, and tactical integration. In plain English, Colonel, she was the one we sent when things went wrong and failure wasn't an option." Ward exhaled slowly. I knew it, he murmured. That's set up in a rig. No standard driver does that. Holt's jaw tightened. So I had a special operations combatant embedded in my motor pool without being informed. Stone met her stare without blinking. That's correct. It's part of a transition initiative. Operators who have been in deep classified work for too long rotate into conventional units for decompression. A chance to regain balance, normalcy. And you thought a forward operating base under intermittent fire was normalcy, Holt shot back. Stone didn't smile. There's no safe place left in this war, Colonel. Liberty just happened to be quieter than most, until tonight. The silence hung heavy. Finally, Holt looked at Riley. And you agreed to this? Yes, ma'am. Why? Riley's voice softened. Because after 7 years of nothing but darkness and noise, I wanted quiet. I wanted to feel ordinary for once. To drive, to breathe, to not be someone's last call. Stone's gaze flicked toward her, part admiration, part sadness. She volunteered, he confirmed. Most don't, but she did. The colonel's tone cooled, but her eyes softened slightly. Then why break cover now? You could have stayed hidden. Riley looked straight at her. Because they needed me. No explanation could have sounded simpler or truer. Stone closed the folder. There'll be no disciplinary action, obviously. Her actions fall under emergency combat authority. I'll see to it she receives full commendation under classified channels. Fine, Holt said quietly, but she's staying on base until my report's complete. I want a full account. Yes, ma'am. Riley stood, saluted, and turned to leave. But Holt's voice stopped her at the door. Shaw. Riley turned. Next time you decide to single-handedly hold off an assault force, I expect a little more notice. A hint of wry respect in the colonel's tone. Yes, ma'am, Riley said. And then she was gone. Outside, the night was slowly surrendering to dawn. The first light brushed over the base, twisted metal, smoking earth, and the faint hum of generators coughing back to life. Riley walked to her ambulance, now scarred with shrapnel, windshield cracked, red crosses blackened with soot. She laid her hand against the metal. Still running, she whispered. Chief Ward joined her, arms folded. Not bad for an uneventful supply driver, huh? She smiled faintly. Guess I overshot the job description. Ward tilted his head. You ever gonna tell me the real story? She shook her head. You already know enough, the rest stays buried. He nodded, understanding. Just promise me one thing, he said. What's that? Don't disappear again. People here need someone like you. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted toward the makeshift hospital tents, soldiers limping, medics working, the wounded alive because she'd refused to stay still. Maybe he was right. By noon, Liberty was a city of motion. Cleanup crews, engineers, replacements. Everyone pretending things were back to normal. But nothing was normal, not anymore. Everywhere she walked, eyes followed her. The quiet driver who'd fought like a ghost. Some whispered, some stared openly. And a few saluted her as she passed, unsure if they were supposed to. Evan Cross approached later that evening, his usual swagger gone. He stopped a few feet from her ambulance, helmet tucked under his arm. I owe you an apology, he said, for what I said before, for not seeing you. Riley wiped her hands on a rag, the faintest smile touching her lips. Start by not underestimating people next time. That's enough. Cross nodded, eyes lowered. Fair, maybe you could teach us a few things. I think I've got some gaps. She laughed softly, a sound no one on base had heard before. Yeah, she said, I can do that. That night, when the lights dimmed and the noise faded, Riley sat alone beside the ambulance. The desert wind carried a faint hum, a kind of peace only found after chaos. She looked at the sky, streaked with faint stars through smoke. And for the first time in years, she felt still. The war hadn't changed her. It had only stripped away the parts she no longer needed: fear, pride, noise. All that was left was purpose. She didn't know what would come next. Maybe teaching, maybe staying. Maybe just one more mission that no one would ever read about. But as she sat there, in the broken quiet of forward operating Base Liberty, Riley Shaw understood something she'd spent her whole career trying to forget. Sometimes, dignity doesn't need medals or recognition. It doesn't shout. It simply acts. And when it's done, it disappears back into silence. How do you return to normal after the night you stopped pretending who you were? For Riley Shaw, normal meant the motor pool, the smell of diesel and grease, the distant echo of hammer strikes, the sound of soldiers rebuilding what the rockets had tried to erase. The base had survived, barely. But survival was only the first battle. 3 days after the attack, the smoke finally cleared. The desert sun felt cruel again, too bright, too honest. And the base that once ran on routine now carried something heavier, the weight of what they'd seen her do. Everywhere she went, eyes followed. Some curious, some reverent, some wary. She was the ambulance chick anymore. Now she was something they didn't have a word for. The motor pool felt smaller now. The same walls, the same concrete, but quieter. Chief Logan Ward leaned over a cracked engine block, sleeves rolled up, when he noticed her walking in. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," he said without looking up. "Morning, Chief." He grinned faintly. "You sleep?" Riley didn't answer. They both knew the answer. She set down her tool bag and began cleaning her rifle. Not because she expected another attack, but because the ritual calmed her. Ward nodded toward her, voice low. "You ever gonna tell the guys who you really are?" She shook her head. "They don't need to know, they just need to be better next time." "Better?" Ward asked. She looked up. Prepared, trained, ready for when it happens again, because it will. There was no drama in her tone, just fact. Ward sighed. "Then teach them." Riley froze. "What?" "Teach them," he repeated. "Cross's fire team, the medics, everyone. You've got more experience in your hands than this entire base combined. You want to make them ready, show them how." She studied him for a moment, measuring the weight of what he'd just said. She'd spent years teaching elite operators how to fight, survive, and disappear. But teaching regular soldiers, young, restless, fragile, that was different. Still, maybe this was her way forward. "All right," she said. "I'll need space, ammo, medical dummies, and a place where no one gets in the way." Ward smirked. "Already cleared a corner by the old hangar. Do your thing, Shaw." The next morning, training session 1 began. 6 soldiers, 3 medics, 1 skeptic, Evan Cross. Riley stood in front of them, hands clasped behind her back, the sun at her back, her voice steady and low. "This isn't boot camp," she said. "This is survival. Out there, rules fall apart fast. The only thing that saves you is how fast you adapt." She didn't yell, didn't pace. She just spoke, and the silence around her felt like command. They began with basic movement drills, not fancy maneuvers, but raw, instinctive positioning. How to read terrain. How to drag a wounded soldier without exposing your chest. How to fire while bleeding. Cross tried to keep his usual grin, but it faded fast. Her standards were brutal, not in words but in expectation. "Again," she'd say. "Slower. Now do it blindfolded." By the 3rd day, the skepticism had vanished. By the 5th, they started showing up early. At night after training, Riley sat alone again, always at the same spot, by the scarred ambulance. She'd trace the bullet holes with her fingertips. Each one a memory. Each one a reminder of what pretending normal had cost her. She wanted peace. But peace, she realized, wasn't the absence of war. It was knowing how to live with what war leaves behind. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the cracked windshield. A face older than her years. Eyes too calm for someone who just lived through hell. That calm wasn't peace, it was survival. And survival had a price. Colonel Holt called her in 2 weeks later. The colonel's office was repaired now, sandbags replaced with polished steel. But her tone carried the same edge. "Shaw," she said, flipping through a file, "I've been reading your incident reports, the classes you're running. You've single-handedly raised the base's readiness level by 30%. Command noticed." Riley didn't react. "Glad to hear it, ma'am." "You're not doing this for recognition," Holt said, almost to herself. "Are you?" Riley smiled faintly. "No, ma'am. I'm doing it so the next time something like that happens, maybe someone else takes that ridge before I have to." The colonel leaned back. "You ever think about going back, your old unit?" Riley paused. "I did once." "And now?" She looked out the window at the soldiers training, laughing, living. "Now I think they've got enough ghosts without me adding another." Holt's gaze softened. "You know, most soldiers spend their careers chasing medals. You spend yours trying to disappear." Riley met her eyes. "Ma'am, the only people who need to remember what I did are the ones I saved." Holt nodded slowly. "I'll make sure they do." By the third week, Liberty felt different. The chatter was sharper. The laughter more cautious. Every soldier now checked their gear twice before leaving. Even Cross, who used to mock her quiet demeanor, had become one of her strongest trainees. He still joked sometimes, but there was respect behind it now. He'd seen what she was capable of, and what that kind of control cost. One evening after drills, Cross caught up with her. "You ever think about how many lives you've saved?" he asked. Riley looked at him. "I think about the ones I didn't." Cross didn't know what to say to that. He nodded and walked away, realizing maybe the strongest people weren't the loudest. They were the ones carrying silence like armor. That night, Noah Price stopped by her quarters. He carried 2 cups of coffee, the instant kind that tasted like metal and dust. He handed one to her. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" he said. "Never could." He sat across from her, the weight of exhaustion in every motion. "You know, I keep replaying that night," he said quietly. "Every move, every decision, the way you just went." Riley didn't interrupt. "I was scared," he admitted. "More than I've ever been, but watching you walk out there, it wasn't bravery. It was clarity, like you already accepted what might happen." She stared at the ground, voice soft. "That's the trick, Noah. Fear doesn't go away. You just learn to work with it, to let it guide you." He frowned. "And if it paralyzes you?" "Then you've already made your choice." He studied her face for a long time. "You ever regret it, the life before this?" Riley's eyes darkened, distant. "Regret doesn't change the dead. It just makes the living quieter." They sat in silence, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. In the weeks that followed, word spread. Other units requested training. The Shaw drills, they called them, though she hated the name. But she didn't argue, she just kept teaching. Her classes weren't about heroics. They were about small things: cover, angles, breathing, timing, compassion. She made medics practice shooting. She made infantry practice applying tourniquets. She broke down the barriers between what soldiers thought they were and what they needed to be. "Everyone's combat," she'd say. "You don't need to be a hero, you just need to move forward when it counts." They listened. Because when someone who's seen death talks about life, you listen. Then came a letter. Delivered by drone courier, sealed under classified code. From Caleb Stone. A single line handwritten beneath the official text. "When the dust settles, Some of us find peace in teaching. Others are just waiting to be called again. Riley read it 3 times, then folded it neatly and placed it in her locker. She knew what it meant. Once you've been part of the shadows, the light never really trusts you. But she wasn't ready to go back, not yet. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, she walked past the perimeter fence, the same one that once burned during the assault. The sand shimmered gold and red, like the desert was trying to forget the blood it had swallowed. She stopped by the ridge she'd crawled up that night. The wind was soft now, brushing against her sleeve like a memory. Somewhere below, a mechanic laughed. A radio hummed with distant music. For the first time in months, she felt something strange. Not peace, not pride. Something smaller. Belonging. Because maybe this was what she'd been missing. Not the missions, not the adrenaline, but the purpose that came after. The quiet, invisible kind. Later that night, she wrote a short note in her personal log. No rank, no unit, just words. The enemy wasn't just outside the wire. It was inside us, the part that forgets why we fight. The part that needs to feel invincible. Tonight, they remembered what humanity looks like under fire. I hope they never forget again. She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp and let the silence settle. Outside, the desert wind carried the faint clang of metal, the sound of rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, Riley Shaw didn't feel like she was hiding. She was exactly where she needed to be. Sometimes the real war isn't between armies. It's between the person you were trained to be and the one you choose to become afterward. Why did peace always sound temporary? 3 months had passed since the night forward operating Base Liberty burned. 3 months since the red cross on Riley Shaw's ambulance became more than paint. The base had healed, or at least pretended to. Barracks rebuilt, new shipments of ammunition stacked neatly where the fuel depot once burned. But under the surface, everyone knew the truth. Liberty wasn't safe. It was just quiet again. And quiet in war was always a warning. The training legacy. Riley's training program had spread like wildfire. What began as a few drills by the old hangar turned into full-blown tactical readiness. Every morning, groups rotated through her courses, not because they were ordered to, but because word had spread. Shaw teaches you how to stay alive. She taught the medics how to move under fire. She taught the infantrymen how to think like defenders instead of aggressors. And most importantly, she taught everyone how to stay calm when calm is impossible. There were no medals, no speeches. Just silent discipline and respect that replaced mockery. Evan Cross was now her assistant instructor, a title he never officially earned but one everyone accepted. He'd changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by quiet confidence. He followed her lead like someone who finally understood what real leadership looked like. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. The letter from Fort Lee. One evening, after a long day of training, Chief Logan Ward approached with a sealed envelope. From command, he said, handing it over. Came through a classified channel. Looks like they finally noticed you. Riley raised an eyebrow, but didn't open it right away. Letters like that never carried simple news. When she finally unfolded it, the paper smelled faintly of machine oil and dust. A transfer order. Fort Lee, Virginia. Development of Advanced Combat Support Curriculum. Request for Sergeant Riley Shaw's direct participation. Ward watched her face as she read. They want you to teach stateside, real classrooms, real pay. She folded it quietly. Not yet. He frowned. Why not? Her voice was calm but final. Because they're not ready to lose what we've built here, and neither am I. Ward nodded, half expecting that answer. You know, some people would kill for a desk and air conditioning. I've had enough air-conditioned wars, she replied. The new arrival. 2 weeks later, a convoy rolled in from Kandahar. New faces, replacements, fresh uniforms, wide-eyed soldiers who hadn't yet learned what war really looked like. Among them was Lieutenant Ava Lennox, a combat nurse barely 30. Sharp, determined, the kind who wanted to fix everything she touched. Riley noticed her immediately, not for her uniform, but for the way she looked at the wounded with both compassion and guilt, as if every injury was a personal failure. That night, Lennox approached her by the ambulance. "You're Sergeant Shaw," she said. "I've read your file, sort of." Riley looked up from a wrench, sort of. Lennox hesitated. "Most of it's redacted, but the parts that aren't, they're incredible. You saved half this base." Riley didn't smile. "I drove, others fought, others bled. Don't rewrite the story." Lennox stood there, unsure how to respond. "I didn't mean." "I know," Riley said softly. "You just haven't learned yet that survival isn't glory, it's debt." That shut the young lieutenant up, not out of fear but respect. From that day, Lennox started showing up early. Watching, listening, absorbing everything Riley said. The new threat. In the 4th month, the reports began again. Scattered at first. Then louder. Insurgent cells reuniting across the region. Drone footage catching unusual movement. Convoys traveling under cover of sandstorms. New emplacements popping up in valleys that were once empty. The analysts said it was nothing. Routine activity. Riley knew better. Patterns never lied. She found Holt one evening in the ops tent. "Ma'am, those movements east of Jalrak, they're forming routes, not random." The colonel didn't look up from her screen. "I've read the same feed, Sergeant. Intel says no credible threat." Riley leaned closer, voice firm. "With respect, Intel said the same thing 3 months ago." That made Holt pause. She finally looked up. "You think they're coming again?" "I think they're learning," Riley said quietly, "and learning enemies are the worst kind." Holt studied her a moment longer. "All right, quietly reinforce the perimeter, double your drills, but until higher command gives confirmation, we don't panic." Riley nodded. She didn't believe in panic anyway. The training evolves. The next day, Riley changed everything. Her drills became harder. Longer. Less about shooting, more about surviving chaos. She ran night simulations. Forced teams to navigate blindfolded under simulated mortar fire. She taught them how to fight in silence, how to think in smoke and confusion. Some soldiers complained. She didn't care. "War doesn't give you warning shots," she told them. "Neither will I." Lennox watched her one evening as she corrected Cross's stance during a drill. "You treat fear like it's part of the job," Lennox said later. Riley shrugged, "Because it is." Lennox frowned, "But how do you not let it control you?" Riley smiled faintly. "You don't kill it, you negotiate with it." That line stayed with Lennox long after. The night before. Weeks later, Riley stood again at the perimeter, just as she had before the first attack. The wind was still. The moon hung low. Her instincts prickled, the kind of unease that doesn't come from sound or sight, but absence. Too quiet. Too still. She checked her watch, 0240. The same hour as last time. "Don't do this to me," she whispered to the horizon. But the desert didn't listen. The second assault. The first explosion wasn't as loud as before, smaller, tactical. But its precision told her everything she needed to know. It wasn't random fire, it was probing. Testing. Then came the mortars. 246. The alarms wailed again. Only this time, Liberty was ready. Riley sprinted to the command tent before anyone could issue orders. "Sector 2, North Wall, that's where they'll push," she said. "Cross, take your squad and block the gate. Lennox, med station prep. Ward, get the trucks fueled and ready for evac." Holt turned to her mid-chaos, shouting, "You running the show now, Sergeant." Riley didn't slow. "Just borrowing it till sunrise." The colonel didn't argue, she learned better. What followed wasn't the same kind of battle. It wasn't desperation, it was discipline. Her training held. Teams moved fluidly, covering angles, dragging wounded under fire without hesitation. Riley drove the ambulance straight into the chaos again, headlights off, moving by memory. Her M4 rested beside her leg, loaded, ready. The enemy came in waves, but this time Liberty didn't break. When an RPG took out the West Watchtower, she rerouted medical through the secondary entrance before command even called it. When comms cut, she switched to backup frequencies. Every move precise. Every command built from experience. By dawn, it was over. The attackers were repelled, driven back before sunrise. No friendly deaths. Dozens wounded, but all stabilized. Liberty stood again. The cost of command. The sun rose slow and red, painting the sky with a kind of fragile calm. Riley sat beside the ambulance, helmet on the ground, blood drying on her gloves. Lennox approached, covered in dirt, exhaustion written across her face. "They made it," she said, almost disbelieving. "All of them." Riley nodded. "That's how you measure progress." Lennox crouched beside her. "How did you know? How did you feel it coming?" Riley stared at the horizon, voice low. "Because peace doesn't last when people stop respecting it. We got comfortable again. I just refused to." Lennox was quiet for a long moment. Then said softly, "You ever stop teaching, fighting, preparing?" Riley smiled faintly, without humor. "Stopping is how you get caught." The aftermath. A day later, Colonel Holt gathered the command staff. Her face was drawn but proud. "Liberty held because of preparation," she said. "Because when we got hit again, we didn't freeze. That's not command credit, that's training credit." Her eyes shifted to Riley. "Sergeant Shaw, you saved this base twice. I'm making your Fort Lee transfer permanent. You'll lead the new Combat Support Readiness Program. You've earned it." Riley hesitated. The room fell silent. Then she said softly, "If I leave, who keeps them ready here?" Holt exhaled. "You've already given them that. What you built will outlast you." Riley looked around at Cross, at Lennox, at Ward. They weren't the same people she'd met months ago. They didn't need her to lead anymore. They'd learned how to lead themselves. Maybe that was enough. That night she packed her duffel in silence. Cross found her at the motor pool, standing beside the same scarred ambulance. "So that's it?" he asked. "Not it," she said, "just the next thing." He smiled. "You sure Fort Lee's ready for you?" "Probably not." They both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that only comes from people who have shared fire. When he saluted her, she returned it, slow, respectful, final. The departure. At sunrise, she climbed into the transport truck. Ward loaded her last bag, eyes distant. "You did good, Shaw," he said. She gave a small nod. "So did you, Chief." The engine started. As the truck rolled out, she looked back at Liberty, the place that had nearly killed her and somehow rebuilt her instead. The gates closed behind her, dust rising in her wake. And for the first time in years, she wasn't running from her past. She was walking toward it, to teach others what silence under fire truly means. Some battles end with explosions, others end with understanding. And the rarest kind, the ones that matter most, end when a soldier finally learns that leading isn't about fighting. It's about preparing others to survive when you're gone. She thought leaving the desert would make the ghosts fade. It didn't. When Staff Sergeant Riley Shaw stepped off the transport at Fort Lee, the air felt wrong, too clean, too still. No dust, no gunfire, no smell of diesel soaked into the skin. Just neat buildings, clipped grass, and soldiers in crisp uniforms walking like they'd never heard an explosion in their lives. She adjusted the duffel over her shoulder, eyes scanning the compound. The sign above the main gate read, U.S. Army Combat Support Training Command. A new battlefield. Just quieter. The arrival. Chief Logan Ward was already there waiting, leaning against a Humvee, coffee in hand, his usual half-grin hiding whatever emotion he didn't say out loud. "Welcome to paradise," he said. Riley raised an eyebrow. Paradise doesn't usually come with barbed wire. Old habits die hard, even here. He led her toward the administrative wing, freshly painted, lined with framed commendations and motivational posters. Words like integrity, discipline, readiness printed in bold black. Riley stopped at one, staring for a moment. "Funny," she said quietly. "We put the hardest words on the walls, never in people." Ward gave her a sideways look. "Still philosophical, I see." She didn't answer. The briefing. Inside, a group of officers waited, part of the new Curriculum Development Board. Colonel Henderson, the program director, extended his hand. "Sergeant Shaw, I've read the reports from Afghanistan, impressive work." Riley shook his hand once. "Just did my job, sir." He nodded toward the table. "You'll be helping design and instruct the new Combat Support Resilience Program. Basically, what you built at Liberty scaled for the entire Army, cross-training medics, drivers, logistics, and field engineers in high-threat survival." She studied the documents spread before her, maps, charts, training outlines. Everything too clean, too theoretical. "Sir," she said finally, "none of this will hold in real chaos." Henderson frowned slightly. "That's why you're here, to fix it. But remember, this isn't the field. We operate by protocol, classroom structure, simulations, minimal risk." Riley's eyes narrowed. Minimal risk doesn't train soldiers for war. He gave a polite smile, the kind bureaucrats used when they didn't want to argue. "Understood. Let's start with minimal risk for now." She didn't respond. But in her mind, she already knew, if she was going to teach this right, she'd have to break every rule written on that whiteboard. The classroom. The first group of trainees filed in the next morning, 30 soldiers. Mixed units, medics, transport operators, signalers, supply clerks. All of them wearing the same look she once saw at Liberty. The quiet arrogance of people who believed combat was something that happened to other soldiers. Riley stood at the front of the room. No slides, no salutes, just a whiteboard and a marker. She wrote one sentence in black ink. "Survival begins when procedure fails." Turning to face them, she said, "Forget the manuals. Forget the drills that stop at the word simulate. Out there, nothing behaves like doctrine. You either learn to improvise or you die waiting for orders." A few soldiers shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a young corporal, muttered, "We're not combat arms, ma'am." Riley looked at him for a long second. "Neither was I, until the day I had to be." Silence. She started packing slowly. "You all think your jobs are support, logistics, medical, transportation. Let me tell you something, war doesn't care about job titles. When bullets start flying, the only question is, can you still move?" Then she smiled faintly, "So let's find out." The training begins. She dragged them out into the open field, full gear, midday heat. No shade, no water. "Every one of you will perform casualty evacuation, marksmanship, and defensive maneuvering under physical stress," she said. "When you can't breathe, when you can't think, when your body says stop." They laughed at first, nervous laughter. By the second hour, no one was laughing. She made them crawl through mud, carry wounded dummies uphill, run tactical drills under blaring speakers simulating explosions. Every time someone stumbled, she made them repeat. Ward watched from the sideline, arms crossed, shaking his head. "You're gonna make them hate you." "They'll thank me when it matters," she said, not slowing down. The skeptic. After the third week, the complaints reached Colonel Henderson. He called her in, tone clipped. "Sergeant, you're pushing them too hard. We've got reports of heat exhaustion, injuries, morale issues." "Sir," Riley interrupted softly, "morale won't save them when the convoy explodes." He glared. "This is Afghanistan anymore. You're not in a war zone." She met his eyes. "You think the enemy checks zip codes?" He exhaled sharply. "Fine, but keep the training within limits. I won't have a lawsuit because one of your students broke an ankle in the name of realism." She nodded. "Understood, sir." But when she walked out, her jaw clenched. She didn't believe in half measures. Not when lives depended on the other half. The unexpected visit. One afternoon, as she wrapped up a training session, a familiar vehicle pulled into the compound. Unmarked civilian plates. From it stepped Caleb Stone. Same calm, unreadable face, same aura of classified secrets. He waited until the trainees cleared out, then said quietly, "You've made an impression." Riley wiped sweat from her forehead. "That what they call complaints these days?" He almost smiled. "Depends who's complaining. Some say you're revolutionizing combat support training. Others say you're destabilizing it." She folded her arms. "Truth's usually somewhere in between." Stone studied her for a moment. "You ever miss it?" "The field?" she asked. "No," he said, "the silence after." Riley looked away. "Every day." He nodded slowly. "They offered you this post because they think you're done with the fight. You and I both know you're not." "I'm teaching," she said. "That's enough." "For now," he replied. "But if it starts again, if it spreads, you'll be on the first call list." She met his gaze. "Then let's hope it doesn't." He didn't answer. He just left the way he came, quiet, efficient, like a shadow that never really leaves. The transformation. Months passed. Her program evolved, the first of its kind. Simulations became real enough to draw in special observers. Word spread to other bases. Shaw's methods, they called it. Not doctrine, not regulation, just results. Her trainees graduated sharper, faster, calmer. Some went to field hospitals in Iraq, others to logistics hubs across Europe. And when trouble came, roadside bombs, ambushes, base attacks, those who trained under her walked out alive more often than not. Reports started returning to Fort Lee. One line repeated again and again. "We did what Shaw taught us, it worked." Each time she read that line, Riley felt both pride and unease. Because teaching survival meant she was teaching others to face what she barely survived herself. And every time a new student asked her, "What was it like that night at Liberty?" she'd answer the same way. "It doesn't matter what it was like. It matters what you do when it happens to you." The test. In December, a classified exercise was scheduled. Joint training between conventional support units and a visiting special operations detachment. Riley didn't know which one. The manifest was redacted until she saw them step off the helicopter. SEAL Team 9. Her old world. Her old ghosts. The team leader, Commander Reese Dalton, spotted her immediately. "Damn," he muttered, walking over. "Didn't think I'd ever see you outside a black site." "Didn't think I'd ever see daylight again," she replied dryly. Dalton smirked. "You training supply clerks now." "I'm training survivors." He laughed, shaking his head, still poetic as hell. But later that day, during the joint drill, she proved again who she was. Her mixed team, half medics, half drivers, outmaneuvered the SEALs in a mock assault exercise using decoy vehicles and coordinated casualty deception. When the buzzer ended, Dalton pulled off his helmet, grinning. Guess I shouldn't have underestimated the logistics crowd. Riley gave him a look. That's what the enemy does every time. He sobered instantly, still teaching lessons, huh? Always. The reflection. That night she stayed late in the empty field. No lights, just the sound of wind moving through the trees. She thought of Liberty, of Cross, of Lennox, of Ward. Of every soldier who'd looked at her not as a hero, but as proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when it mattered. And she realized something she'd never said aloud. She didn't miss combat. She missed purpose. Out here, she'd found it again, in the hands that learned from hers, in the quiet transformation of others. She took out her notebook, the same one from Afghanistan, and wrote a single line beneath the old entries. Strength isn't what you carry into war. It's what you leave behind when you walk away from it. She closed the book, tucked it into her pocket, and looked up at the empty night sky. Stars barely visible through the city haze. Maybe that was the price of safety, to trade clear skies for comfort. The next morning she walked back into the classroom, same board, same marker. The words she'd written months ago, still faintly visible beneath new lessons. She erased everything and wrote just one new sentence. Peace is not the absence of fear, it's learning to act in spite of it. Then she turned to her students and said quietly, "All right, let's begin." Sometimes the strongest warriors aren't the ones still fighting. They're the ones who teach others how to survive the fight they hope will never come. 6 months after arriving at Fort Lee, her training program had gone far beyond its original scope. They called it Integrated Combat Readiness, but everyone just said Shaw Method. Other branches requested copies of her curriculum. Foreign allies sent observers. And the Pentagon sent praise wrapped in polite caution. Revolutionary, they said. Groundbreaking. Potentially scalable to active combat doctrine. Riley didn't care about words like doctrine. She cared that her trainees were coming home alive. Still, something about the attention made her uneasy. Too many smiles from people who'd never smelled cordite or carried a bleeding man through dust. The visit. It was late spring when Colonel Henderson knocked on her office door. He didn't usually knock. "Come in," she said, eyes still on the after-action reports. He stepped inside with a folder stamped top secret. "Got a visitor for you." Behind him walked Major Linton, Department of Defense liaison, polished boots, pressed uniform, the kind of posture that told everyone he worked in offices with carpet. "Sergeant Shaw," he said, offering a practiced smile. "The Secretary of Defense read your latest assessment. He's impressed." Riley leaned back, unimpressed herself. "That's nice of him." Linton opened the folder. "They're creating a task force to expand your curriculum into a full-scale combat adaptation initiative, live deployment training for partner nations. You'd lead it." She frowned. "Live deployment." He nodded. "Real missions, limited scale, you'd supervise, test your techniques in the field." Ward, who'd been standing near the doorway, tensed. "You mean use her students as test subjects?" "Operational proof of concept," Linton corrected smoothly. "This could redefine modern warfare readiness." Riley stared at the folder, the words blurred. "Redefine," she repeated, "or repeat." Linton blinked. "Excuse me." She stood slowly. "Sir, I built this to keep people alive, not to make better killers." He tried another smile, thinner this time. "Survival and lethality often overlap." "Not in my book," she said. Henderson cleared his throat. "Sergeant." But she'd already turned away. "Tell the secretary I'll think about it." When they left, Ward muttered, "You won't." She didn't answer. The rumor. By the next week, rumors spread through the base like wildfire. Shaw's program's going operational. She's forming her own unit. Special forces are involved. Students asked her if it was true. She said nothing. But that silence was an answer in itself, and it gnawed at her. Every night she reread the reports, graphs showing success rates, improved casualty survival percentages, reduced reaction times. On paper, she'd built perfection. In her heart, she knew perfection always asked for blood to prove itself. The conflict. Chief Ward found her late one evening, alone in the training bay, standing among half-disassembled mannequins and blood-stained tourniquets. "You're running yourself into the ground," he said. She didn't look up. "Better me than them." He leaned on a table. "They're twisting your work, you know that, right?" "I know." "Then stop them." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "How? The more I teach, the more they want to weaponize it. You ever feel like you're building something good just so someone else can use it wrong?" Ward exhaled. "Every damn day." Riley smiled faintly. "Then you understand." He watched her for a long time. "Maybe you should walk away before they drag you back into the kind of missions you tried to leave." She shook her head. "I walk away, and they'll fill this place with someone who doesn't care what it costs." The new student. A week later, a new trainee arrived. Name, Lieutenant Ava Lennox. Riley froze when she saw her name on the roster. Last she'd heard, Lennox was still at liberty. When the young officer stepped off the transport, she was different, sharper, leaner, eyes older than her years. "Didn't expect to see you here," Riley said. "They reassigned me," Lennox replied. "Apparently I'm your success story." Riley gave a small nod. "You survived, that's the point." Lennox smiled faintly. "You taught us to fight like ghosts. Thought maybe I should learn from the source again." Through her, Riley saw how far the ripple had spread. Her methods living on in the field, changing people, for better or worse. That night, watching Lennox instruct a new medic on battlefield triage, Riley felt pride and fear. Because teaching people to survive meant giving them the tools to kill. The breaking point. Summer heat wrapped the base in shimmering haze. A drone buzzed overhead, capturing footage for a promotional video. Tomorrow's readiness today. Riley hated it. The cameras, the interviews, the glossy smiles. During one demonstration, a young sergeant misjudged a maneuver and dislocated his shoulder. The public affairs team tried to cut the feed. Riley ordered them to keep filming. "Show them the cost," she said. That night, Colonel Henderson summoned her. "Sergeant, this isn't a war zone. You're not in command of PR." "Then maybe PR shouldn't train soldiers," she said. He stood. "You're insubordinate." "No," she said quietly, "I'm honest." He dismissed her on the spot, temporarily suspending her instruction authority pending review. For the first time in years, Riley Shaw was ordered to stand still. The silence. 2 weeks. No teaching, no drills, no orders. She spent her mornings walking the empty field where students once ran until they collapsed. The quiet unnerved her. Too familiar, too much like waiting for the next shell to hit. One night, Ward found her again, sitting on the hood of her old training vehicle, staring at the stars. "They can't keep you grounded forever," he said. Riley's voice was flat. "Maybe they should." Ward studied her face. "You think you did something wrong." She shrugged. "Maybe I built something too strong. Maybe I forgot that saving lives and preparing for war aren't always the same thing." He sat beside her. "You built something that keeps people breathing. Don't let politics ruin that." She didn't reply. But deep down, she knew he was right. The call. At dawn, her phone buzzed, a secure line she hadn't used since Liberty. When she answered, the voice was unmistakable. Caleb Stone. Morning, Riley. She sighed. You always call when things go wrong. They haven't yet, but they will. What's happening? He hesitated. Your program being greenlit for deployment without you. Her stomach turned. They're sending untested trainees into combat. They're calling it advisory integration. I call it reckless. She closed her eyes. Where? Somewhere they still deny we are. I can't say more. Her voice hardened. Then I'm going. That's not authorized. When has that ever stopped me? Stone's silence said everything. The decision. By evening she'd packed. No orders, no escort. Just a flight manifest left unsigned. Ward caught her at the gate. Let me guess, you're not going to Disney World. She smirked. You once told me not to disappear again. Yeah, he said, didn't mean into another war. She tightened her strap. Someone has to make sure they don't turn what we built into another body count. He nodded slowly, then go make sure. They shook hands, one soldier to another, both knowing this might be the last time. The return to shadows. 48 hours later, a military transport dropped her in a country she wouldn't name. Different desert, same smell. A temporary outpost on the edge of nowhere. And among the advisors deployed under the adaptation initiative, she saw her own students, faces she'd trained, eyes she'd hardened. They looked up in disbelief when they saw her step off the plane. Ma'am, one stammered, they said you weren't coming. I wasn't, she said. Then I heard you might need someone to remind command what survival actually means. Lennox appeared behind them, armor dusty, grin wide. Told them you show up. Riley looked around, the same nervous energy before a storm. What's the situation? Intelligence says local militias planning coordinated strikes on Allied convoys. We're here to advise, not engage, Lennox said, quoting doctrine. Riley almost laughed. Advisors always end up in fights. The waiting. That night the wind carried distant thunder, too rhythmic to be weather. Incoming artillery somewhere beyond the hills. She sat by the fire, cleaning her weapon by reflex. Lennox joined her quietly. You think they'll hit us? Riley nodded. Eventually, they always do. Then why come back? Riley's eyes reflected the firelight. Because someone has to remember why we started, before this turns into something worse. Lennox studied her. You ever get tired of being the one who fixes everything? Riley smiled sadly. I'm not fixing it. I'm just making sure it breaks the right way. The moral. Hours later, she lay awake, listening to the desert breathe. Every rustle, every shift of sand sounded like memory. She thought of Fort Lee, of Ward, of students learning to save lives. She thought of the word peace, how fragile it felt in her hands. She knew she couldn't stop what was coming. She could only make sure the people facing it would live long enough to learn why it shouldn't happen again. Some people fight wars. Some try to end them. But a rare few stand in the space between, teaching others how to survive long enough to remember what peace was supposed to mean. She'd sworn she'd never command again. But war doesn't listen to vows. The wind was sharp that night, dry, electric, and too still. The kind of stillness that comes before everything breaks. From the ridge above the outpost, Staff Sergeant Riley Shaw watched through her binoculars. The horizon was dark except for the faint glimmer of distant lights, militia trucks, engines low, gathering in the valley. They're forming up, she said quietly. Beside her, Lieutenant Ava Lennox adjusted her headset. Intel said they wouldn't hit until tomorrow. Riley didn't take her eyes off the ridge. Then Intel lied. She dropped the binoculars, her voice cutting clean through the wind. Get everyone ready. They'll be on us within the hour. The ignored warning. Inside the command tent, Captain Reeves, the appointed field officer, scowled at the map laid out on the table. "This is an advisory mission, Shaw. We're not authorized for direct engagement." Riley stared at him, steady, calm, terrifyingly controlled. "You'll be authorized when they're inside your wire." Reeves shook his head. "We follow protocol." "Protocol won't stop bullets," she said flatly. He looked at her, the legend from Liberty, the one the Pentagon sent as a symbol. He mistook that calm for arrogance. "Sergeant, your job is to observe training effectiveness, not run the operation." Riley stepped closer. "If you're wrong, you'll have 50 dead soldiers by sunrise. Do you really want to test who's right?" Reeves hesitated, jaw tight. He didn't like her, didn't trust her. But something in her voice, or maybe in her eyes, made him pause. "All right," he said finally. "Prep defensive positions, but this stays off record." Riley gave a single nod. "Records don't bleed, sir. People do." The preparation. Within minutes, the camp transformed. Barricades went up, ammunition distributed. Generators killed to minimize heat signatures. Riley moved like clockwork through the chaos, calm in motion. Every order precise, every hand signal clear. Lennox followed her like shadow. "You think they'll hit hard?" "Harder than last time," Riley said. "They're organized now, they've learned." "Then what do we do?" Riley checked her weapon, voice soft. "What we always do. We hold until help arrives or until no one's left to hold." The waiting. By midnight, the sky was black, no stars, just the hum of tension. The soldiers crouched behind sandbags, weapons ready, breath slow. Riley walked the line, eyes scanning each face, young, pale, pretending not to be afraid. She didn't give speeches. Just a quiet nod to each one. They didn't need words. They needed someone who wasn't shaking. Lennox whispered as Riley passed, "Do you ever get used to this?" Riley glanced at her. "No, you just stop expecting to." Then from the darkness, the faint, unmistakable pop, pop, pop of distant rifles. Riley's tone dropped. "Here we go." The assault. The first mortar landed wide, kicking up sand and static. The second hit closer. By the third, the camp was awake, shouting, moving, firing. Riley's voice cut through the noise. "Sector 2, suppress. Lennox medics to the southern wall. Get that truck turned now." Rounds ripped through the night. Tracers painted the horizon red. The radio screamed for updates, most of them wrong or outdated. Captain Reeves was somewhere behind the command vehicle, shouting for order. But order belonged to chaos now. Riley didn't wait for permission. She sprinted to the front line, sliding behind a sandbag wall as bullets chewed the dirt. Lennox dropped beside her, breath ragged. "Reeves says hold position." "He's welcome to hold it from the command tent," Riley replied, sighting down her rifle. She fired controlled bursts, picking targets by instinct. The enemy pushed from the east ridge, using the shadows and wreckage for cover. Smart trained, not the usual militia chaos. "These aren't irregulars," she said under her breath. "They're working with someone." The turning point. An explosion tore through the outer gate. A truck packed with explosives detonated perfectly. The shockwave slammed into them, throwing Lennox backward. Riley hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision fractured by dust and light. She tasted blood, felt the weight of her rifle, and forced herself up. "Lennox." The lieutenant coughed, waved weakly. "Still here." "Then move." They staggered toward the breach. Through the smoke, shapes emerged, armed fighters storming the perimeter. Riley didn't hesitate. She fired until her rifle clicked dry, reloaded and fired again. Lennox covered her flank, shouting coordinates into the radio. But the net was chaos, interference, crosstalk, panic. Riley keyed the emergency channel. "This is Shaw. We are under full assault. Multiple hostiles inside the wire. Request immediate air support." Static answered her. Then a distant voice. "Negative. Air assets grounded due to weather. Hold position." Riley closed her eyes briefly. Of course. The choice. Captain Reeves appeared, face pale, eyes wide. "They're breaking through. We need to evacuate." Riley grabbed him by the vest, pulling him close enough to see the steadiness in her eyes. "You evacuate and they'll slaughter whoever's left. You stand, we might hold." He froze, torn between fear and duty. "This isn't my fight," he whispered. "It's everyone's fight," she said, "whether you asked for it or not." He hesitated, then ran. Riley didn't watch him go. She'd already expected it. The stand. The outpost shrank to a single cluster of fortified buildings. Riley regrouped whoever was left, 12 soldiers, 2 medics, 1 terrified private clutching a radio. "Ammo check," she barked. Low came the answers. She nodded, "Then make every shot count." Lennox crouched beside her. "We can't hold much longer." "We hold until we can't," Riley said, scanning for targets. "That's the job." The next wave came, disciplined, aggressive, coordinated. But this time, Riley's training kicked in. Her people moved like one organism, covering, flanking, pulling wounded to safety. They fought like they'd been taught. They fought like Liberty had taught her. The battle blurred into hours. Riley lost count of time, of rounds fired, of screams heard. At some point, her rifle jammed. She drew her sidearm, switching hands when the first grew too numb to steady. Blood streaked her sleeve, not all of it hers. When Lennox stumbled beside her, hit in the shoulder, Riley dragged her behind cover. "You're not dying here," she said. Lennox laughed through the pain. "You always say that." "Because I mean it." She pressed a bandage against the wound, eyes flicking between the lieutenant and the fight beyond. The sounds were thinning, fewer shots now, shorter bursts. Either they were losing, or the enemy was. The arrival. Just before dawn, the sound changed. Not gunfire, rotor blades. A shadow swept across the horizon, 2 Apache helicopters, slicing through the gray sky like vengeance made metal. Missiles streaked toward the ridge. Explosions rolled like thunder. The attackers broke, scattering into the desert. For the first time in 12 hours, silence returned. Riley stood slowly, limbs trembling. Her ears rang with the hollow echo of gunfire that had stopped too late. She looked around. Bodies, friend and foe, scattered through smoke and sand. The outpost still stood barely. And then she saw him, Captain Reeves, crawling from the wreckage of the command tent. He looked up at her, shaking, eyes full of shame. I didn't think they'd come that hard." Riley's voice was ice. "They always come that hard." He tried to speak, but she'd already turned away. The aftermath. By midday, medevac birds had come and gone. Wounded loaded, dead counted. 24 soldiers survived out of 43. It was a victory, they'd say later. But victory always looks uglier up close. Riley sat beside Lennox's stretcher, holding a saline line steady while medics patched her up. The lieutenant's eyes fluttered open. "Did we win?" Riley stared at the horizon, scorched earth, smoldering metal. "We're still here," she said. "That's close enough." The reckoning. When command arrived 2 days later, the reports started. Who gave which orders? Who broke protocol? Who acted beyond scope? Riley's name filled most of the pages. A general she didn't recognize called her into the debrief tent. He was all medals and polished tone. "Sergeant Shaw, once again you've shown exceptional initiative, but you also defied chain of command." Riley stood at ease. "And kept people alive, sir." He sighed. You understand how difficult that makes this politically. Politics doesn't bury the dead, sir. Soldiers do. He studied her, maybe angry, maybe impressed. Then finally said, "You'll be relieved of active field duties, effective immediately." She nodded once, understood. He hesitated. "Off record, Sergeant, good work." The departure. That night she stood alone by the burnt gate, same spot she defended hours before. Wind cut through the smoke, tugging at her sleeve. Lennox limped over, arm in a sling. "So that's it, you're heading back." Riley nodded. "Fort Lee, they'll probably shut the program down after this." Lennox frowned. "They shouldn't, it saved us." Riley smiled faintly. "They'll say it was luck. They always do when they don't understand courage." Lennox looked out at the empty desert. "You know, you've changed how I see everything, how I fight, how I believe." Riley's eyes softened. Then it was worth it. The two women stood in silence as the sky turned violet over the wreckage. When the transport finally arrived, Riley looked back one last time. Not at the base. Not at the scars on the earth. At the people, the ones still standing. Because that's all war ever leaves you, the ones who stood beside you when it mattered. She climbed into the chopper, headset crackling to life. Destination Fort Lee. She leaned back, closing her eyes. For once, no thoughts, no fear, just silence. The kind that didn't come from death, but from survival. Sometimes winning doesn't look like glory. Sometimes it looks like a handful of people still breathing when they shouldn't be. And one soldier who refused to leave them behind. How do you return to normal after walking through fire? That question haunted Staff Sergeant Riley Shaw long after the desert faded from the window of the transport plane. The engines hummed steady. The world below blurred into distance like the war was shrinking, finally leaving her behind. But it never really does. It just changes shape. The return. When Riley stepped off the plane at Fort Lee, the same air that once smelled of safety now felt heavy. The flag still waved, the gates still gleamed. Everything was the same, and nothing was. A quiet escort led her straight to a debriefing room. Sterile white walls, no windows. 2 chairs, 1 camera. She sat, hands folded. Opposite her, Major Linton, the same polished officer who once brought her the initiative proposal. He looked at her like someone examining a weapon that misfired. "Sergeant Shaw," he began, "you went against direct orders, deployed without clearance, assumed operational command, and engaged enemy combatants outside of advisory authorization." Riley met his gaze, and he hesitated, "and saved 24 lives. That's commendable." "Then why do you sound like it's not?" "Because commendable doesn't mean convenient," he said, voice clipped. "The Pentagon split. Half want to court-martial you for insubordination, half want to put you on posters." She leaned back, exhausted. "Let them fight it out. I'm done fighting." The investigation. The inquiry dragged for weeks. Endless paperwork, closed hearings. Every decision she'd made was dissected by people who'd never heard an incoming mortar. She sat through it all in silence. Occasionally, she'd catch herself watching the faces of the investigators, wondering if they'd ever held someone dying, wondering if they could even understand what she'd done out there. When they asked her why she disobeyed orders, she answered simply, "Because the alternative was watching them die." When they asked if she regretted it, she said, "Regret is for people who had better options." They didn't know what to do with answers like that. So they wrote non-compliant. The visit. It was evening when Chief Logan Ward appeared at her door. He looked older, maybe she did too. He carried a brown envelope under his arm. "Thought you might want to see this." Inside were letters, handwritten, crumpled, stained by sand. From her former students. We used your drills, it saved us. Ma'am, the convoy made it back. We did it the way you taught. You might not remember me, but I owe you my life. Riley didn't speak for a long time. She just held the letters like fragile things that might burn. Ward said quietly, "They're alive because of you. Doesn't matter what the reports say." She looked up at him. "It matters to them." He nodded, "Then let it matter." The verdict. A month later, the board issued its decision. No criminal charges. Official reprimand. Transfer of command. In plain terms, she would never instruct again. They called it administrative resolution. To her, it felt like exile. When Linton delivered the verdict, he avoided her eyes. "You're being reassigned to non-combat consultancy, stateside only. You'll still serve, just differently." Riley smiled faintly. "They can take away the uniform, not the reason I wore it." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Sergeant, history will remember you differently than they write it." She didn't answer. History, she'd learned, was written by survivors and edited by those who'd never been there. The silence. After the review ended, Fort Lee moved on. New instructors, new programs. Her name faded from the rosters like dust swept off a table. Riley spent her days consulting logistics teams, advising on humanitarian deployments, relief missions, disaster zones. She told herself this was better, saving lives without war. But every night when she closed her eyes, she saw the ridge, the flashes, the faces. And she wondered if teaching others to survive had really been enough, or if she just passed her ghosts on to new soldiers. The unexpected letter. One morning, she found an envelope in her mailbox. No return address, just a seal she recognized: Intelligence Division. Inside, a single page. "Heard you're stateside. Thought you should know the people who attacked your outpost weren't militia. They were trained, financed, connected. Someone wanted to test your methods in real time. Is he Stone?" Riley stared at the letter until the words blurred. She folded it once, set it in a drawer, and didn't tell anyone. Some truths are heavier spoken aloud. But something in her changed that day. A quiet realization that survival, even well taught, can be twisted by the wrong hands. And she began to understand what her next fight would be. The new mission. Weeks later, she stood before a group of young recruits, civilians this time. Doctors, engineers, relief workers. No guns, no uniforms. She wrote on the whiteboard, "Preparation is not violence, it's protection." They looked at her, puzzled. She said, "The world will tell you conflict is inevitable. I'm here to teach you how to keep people alive long enough to prove them wrong." She moved through the drills: medical triage, evacuation, tactical calm under chaos, all stripped of aggression, rebuilt for compassion. It wasn't war anymore. It was resilience, the pure kind. After class, a young medic approached her. "Ma'am," she said softly, "were you really in that desert battle they talk about?" Riley smiled faintly. "That's what they say." "What was it like?" She paused, looking past her, as if the answer lived somewhere far away. "It was like standing between life and death, and realizing both sides were human." The conversation. That evening, she met Ward at a small cafe outside the base. No uniforms, no salutes, just two people who'd seen too much. He stirred his coffee. "You ever think about going back?" "Back where?" "Anywhere, the field, the fight, the version of you that scared generals." Riley smiled. "She's still here, she's just tired." He nodded. "You did what they couldn't, turned chaos into order." She shook her head. "No, I just gave chaos a reason to listen." They sat in silence a while. Finally, Ward said, "You ever think maybe survival isn't the goal?" She looked at him. "Then what is?" He smiled faintly. "Living." Riley didn't answer. She just watched the streetlights flicker against the windows, the same rhythm as tracer rounds once did in the dark. Only quieter, gentler. The memorial. Months later, an invitation arrived. A dedication ceremony. In honor of those who served at Outpost Delta. She almost didn't go. But something in her said she needed to. The memorial was small, a stone wall engraved with names. Lennox was there, shoulder healed, now leading a humanitarian security unit overseas. She hugged Riley tight. Couldn't have done any of it without you. Riley smiled. You did it because you had to, that's the difference. As they stepped back, a journalist approached, microphone ready. Sergeant Shaw, he began, do you have a message for those who still see you as a hero? She hesitated, then said softly, heroes don't survive because they're fearless. They survive because they're afraid and still choose to stand. He waited for more, but she turned away, walking toward the quiet part of the memorial, the section without cameras. There, etched among the names, was one she hadn't expected. Cross, her old friend from Liberty, finally honored posthumously. She traced the letters with her fingertips. Whispered, we made it, old man. Took a few detours, but we made it. The reflection. That night back in her small apartment, she opened her old notebook, the same one she carried through fire and silence. She flipped past entries scarred by sand and blood. On the last page she wrote, peace is not a medal you win. It's a discipline you practice in every choice to protect, not destroy. Then she set the pen down and exhaled. For the first time in years, the silence around her didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The final moment. Weeks later, Riley stood on a pier at dawn, watching the horizon bleed gold. Seagulls wheeled above, the water shimmered calm. Her phone buzzed once, an encrypted message from an unknown sender. Just one line. You taught them well, they lived, CS. She smiled, then deleted it. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the salt and sound of life still moving forward. Somewhere behind her, the bass loudspeaker played the morning bugle. Routine duty, another day. Riley turned toward the sound, whispering almost to herself. It never ends, and maybe that's the point. She walked away from the water, each step steady, unhurried. Not toward war, not toward peace, but toward something truer, the quiet work of rebuilding. Because sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't fighting another battle. It's teaching the world how not to need one.